You ready?
Yeah. Let's do this.
And we're on.
Hello.
Well, hello, Lily.
Hello, Dr. Lauren, Bokikio, scientist. You know, that's my favorite thing. My favorite part is saying that you're a scientist. Yes.
You know, I appreciate that.
I'm so proud of you.
As a good scientist, I also, this week, I had a hypothesis from our last episode, and your husband did us a service.
Yes, you did.
By rejecting the hypothesis. And I feel like we should, let's remind our viewers of what we did wrong last week.
So, last week, if anyone recalls, I made an assumption, and I'm glad that I said it was an assumption. I called it out. I did call out that I assumed that Adriel's intentions of asking me to walk the dog was to get me to work out, because I had been complaining about not working out. And of course, as a good scientist does, you asked to check the facts, and you told Adriel to comment on our link to tell us if it was true or not. So Adriel did comment.
Should I do a dramatic reading?
Yes, please.
Adriel. No, Lauren, that was not my intent in asking Lily to walk Mingus in the morning. I had a rough night of sleep the night before and wanted to sleep a little more. Next episode on assuming shit. Laughing face emoji.
Yeah, so my husband called me out on assuming.
Which made us start to think we should probably talk about that.
I think so. I think it's a pretty good topic to discuss, since it's actually human nature to make assumptions.
Yeah, of course. Our judgments are helpful in a lot of situations. When I make a judgment about something, I'm applying a quick description to it so that you and I know we have enough information to go off of that I don't need to give you a huge, long, detailed description of the event.
That's
if I
true.
just tell you it was shitty, you kind of guess I didn't have a good time.
I understand that. But now here's the question. When is a judgment a positive thing, a necessary thing?
So there's this great thing in the DBT manual, and it talks about making a discrimination versus an evaluation. And in most of our lives, like, discrimination means something very different, but in DBT, when they talk about it, they're talking about basically distinguishing between two things. And so, is this food fresh or stale? Is this pool have water in it or not? Is this behavior against the law or not?
So now we're gonna go with the pool example. If the pool does not have water in it, is it a good judgment to jump in it?
Depends. Do you have a skateboard?
No.
Then I'm gonna go with no.
So in other words, judgments save lives.
They can. They absolutely can. And then they can ruin them.
Oh yeah, 100%. Which is more so what's happening nowadays.
Yes, exactly. And so we want to be clear, like, of when we're making a judgment, are we making a judgment that's important to be able to distinguish between two events, or are we actually evaluating the worth or the valence of the event? Am I saying it's good or bad, or am I just giving you a fact about the situation?
How do you do the difference? How do you know there's a difference? How do you figure out how to do it differently?
So if we stick with distinguishing, if we start with distinguishing, so I'm sure this is a common problem. You go to your parents' house and you're like, I'm gonna use some salad dressing. Okay, now, is it expired? How expired is it? Those are the questions I ask myself, because I found some dressing and it expired in 2018.
Holy moly!
And I wasn't checking this in 2018. I was checking this in 2023.
And how many times had you been to your parents' house and chosen the same salad dressing since 2018?
Many times. But as we've discussed, I never know what's happening in my GI tract is because I ate something expired, or if it's because I just ate too much cheese.
Oh, Lord.
So who knows? It's always like a mix of events happening downstairs. So
scientist, Dr. Boki.
yeah, so when I'm scientifically choosing expired foods to see how they'll impact my GI tract. But yeah, so I make that determination, and to be honest, sometimes if it's close enough, I'll just eat it.
Yeah.
But 5 years is not close enough for me.
No.
I just want to be clear.
No. I don't think that's close enough for anybody. I'll even give it like 6 months. 6 months is close enough for me.
My parents are definitely the kind of people who are like, it's not going to kill you. And I'm like, what? I don't want to find out.
Honestly, I think my parents would really say the same. Like, just taste it and see
Yeah.
if you die.
No one's ever died from Newman's Own.
No. And then they wonder why their child is a risk taker.
So that's making that determination, right? I'm making a determination there, and if it's meets a standard or not.
Yeah.
But if I'm no longer asking if it meets the standard, I'm just asking, is it good? That's a different question. Is it stale? Is it expired? Or is it good? Will I enjoy it?
Yeah.
And those are two different things. And the interesting thing is that positive judgments, are actually far less harmful than negative judgments. And so if I was like, you know what, it's not stale and it's great.
Yeah.
That's not going to hurt anybody. But for the most part, our negative judgments actually really increase our distress. Even if they're not about anyone in particular, even if they're not about ourselves. If I'm going through the world making negative judgments about everybody, it's going to impact my ability, my well-being, and my overall happiness.
And your relationships.
Yes.
Why?
Well, have you ever hung out with somebody who has a lot of negative stuff to say?
Oh my God, I have.
What's it like?
So, practicing non-judgmentally to describe this situation, in the moment, I think there's two different things, which actually takes me to another question or another point, because in the therapy room as therapists, judgment and learning how to be non-judgmental is very, very important for the practice of mental health and therapy, and to provide effective and efficient therapy. So in those moments when I'm sitting with somebody who's complaining a lot, and this is not in a therapy room, although that does happen often, in a therapy room I am able to redirect it because I'm the therapist and it's my job.
Yes.
But in a personal life, I kind of keep bringing myself back to, first of all, you're not a therapist, you're not their therapist, so not your circus and not your monkeys.
True.
And secondly, everybody goes through their own belief system. So just let them let it out, put a smile on your face, and then be mindful not to hang out with them again.
Yeah, it really reduces your interest level in hanging out with somebody.
Yeah, but that's the thing. And this is where it's really interesting, because there have been times where I've had friends that are going through like depressive states, because life gets hard. And especially living in the world that we live in and going through a lot of stuff, people go through depressive states just because life is hard. So when they're going through that, when you're going through a depressive state, you have a lot of negative thoughts, a lot of judgmental thoughts, judgmental beliefs. The whole world comes from the perception of like the judgment, everything is bad.
Yes.
It's kind of tainted with that, right? So when you're seeing someone go through that, and they're having a hard time in life and everything looks bad, there's a part of you that's like, for me, what I do, at least with my family and my friends, I'm like, I know life is hard, but you really need to see a therapist because you are going through depression. And it's not about having fun hanging out with you, and not because I want to be here through hard times, but it's about the fact that I'm worried about your health and I can't sit and watch you go through this because it's painful for me. So that's kind of how I communicate to really negative people. And then there are those older, I have this really my friend's grandmother, who's very old and she's hilarious, and she's Jewish, so it kind of adds a bit of character to that. But she's very, very negative, and in a funny way.
In a fun way.
But even hanging out with her more than 2 hours, I'm like, okay, I can't, man. I can't. The world is like, I can't do this, lady. It was nice seeing you today. I'll be back next month for more.
It's so interesting because I think it really does depend on the context, and it's really hard to stay in a space with somebody when they're saying a lot of negative judgments about people, the world, the situation. And I find it really difficult to navigate, interpersonal interactions like that because, yeah, when you're not in a therapist role, you don't get to really be blunt and be like, stop what you're doing. It's not helpful. Yeah. It's not. But in regular life, if I did that to everybody, no one would also want to hang out with me, which is fair. But yeah, these judgments really start to disrupt our relationships, and even more so when they're about other people.
Yeah.
And so when we're making the assumption that somebody's trying to do something, trying to hurt us, it starts to add a different layer to the interaction.
Mm-hmm.
And it really takes the intensity up a notch.
Yeah. And that's the piece where, because it takes the intensity of the emotion up a notch, the thing is, like, if we look at it from the cognitive behavioral model perspective,
Mm-hmm.
your thoughts play a role in your emotions,
Yes.
which then play a role in how you behave,
Mm-hmm.
right? So if I sat there very seriously, if we go back to our example of our last talk, and I was just like, yeah, Adriel, it's not an assumption. Adriel purposely tried to push me to walk
Mm-hmm.
Mingus because he's thinking that I am complaining too much and I need to work out.
Mm-hmm.
So that's going to create an emotion of what towards Adriel? Resentment.
Yeah.
Anger,
Mm-hmm.
annoyance, which then when I go home, how am I going to behave?
Probably pretty annoyed.
Mm-hmm. And I'm going to roll my eyes,
Mm-hmm.
and every little thing he says, I'm going to judge. Like, oh my God, I can't believe you're saying that, which amplifies my annoyance, which rolling of my eyes gets worse. And then he says something else. Oh my God, that's so stupid.
Mm-hmm.
Annoyed. So at some point, and this person on the other end of it also can sense the energy.
Yes.
Body language communicates a lot. And this is one of the things that I tell my clients all the time and my associates who provide therapy. I'm like, if you're judging in your head, it's still obvious.
Yeah.
You can still tell.
Mm-hmm.
So be mindful of that. And that's the thing. If I'm judging in my head, Adriel's going to know. So if I'm judging, this man's going to be like, I'm feeling judged. And then he's going to be like, are you judging me? And then I can either go down the route and say, no.
Mm-hmm.
Or I can go down the route of letting all of my assumptions and my judgments out. And then my favorite saying is, when you make assumptions, you tend to make an ass out of you and me.
It's true. Because that's what happened. I felt very called out when I read that comment.
Well, to be fair, you asked for facts. I
did.
got called out.
That's true. That's fair.
You were like, I don't know if this is true, so please confirm. And he was like, it's not.
Well, guess that's what happens when you make up a story in public. Sorry again.
As an example, sorry.
Yeah, no big deal.
But I will say, it's actually interesting. This past week, especially because of Thanksgiving and prepping a lot of my clients and having conversations after
Yes.
Thanksgiving about the family events, judgments have been a big topic in my sessions.
Same.
And I've really done a lot of explaining and trying to help, because at least with when you have heightened emotions, if you're struggling with anxiety, depression, just heightened emotions, period, you have to understand when you judge, it does affect your emotional reactivity.
Mm-hmm.
which then continues to affect your perception. And the other thing I told the client this week, I was like, sometimes we're most self-critical of ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And when we judge ourselves, it's actually worse because you're amplifying your own negative emotions towards yourself.
Yes.
And then when you learn to communicate with yourself inside of your mind with judgments that are not based off of facts, that aren't like protective factors, but just like pure judgments, then you learn to think and communicate about others that same exact way. So judging others becomes second nature, which then feeling shame and guilt for your action of judging becomes something that you constantly experience. And then you ask yourself, why do I judge people so much? Well, first off, it's because you judge yourself so much.
Yeah.
It starts from there.
Absolutely. And I think that it's so interesting because this reminded me of our conversation about core beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
And that definitely becomes a judgment of how you interpret your own behavior. And sometimes it ends up becoming some sort of catch-all.
Yeah.
Like I hear so many people say I'm lazy.
Mm-hmm.
And it's usually pretty rare that somebody is just like a sloth-like creature who just doesn't do things. There's usually a reason for it.
Mm-hmm.
And we're no longer specific. And so I think similarly with ourselves, when I think about like the ways in which my own judgments I start to generalize them across the board, sometimes they end up becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah.
Where I say, oh, I'm just kind of a bad driver, and then you like take off your side view mirror on your way into the garage. It's not a personal thing that happened to me or anything, but it's definitely happened to people.
All the time.
Yeah, all the time. It's an epidemic. But yeah, so when we start judging other people, and it's something I noticed of whenever I realized I was really wrong, when I made a judgment about someone, realized I was wrong about it later, and I feel a lot of guilt. It doesn't align with my values of how I want to be in the world. And so when sometimes I like to preemptively get annoyed with my husband because I feel like I know he would have done the thing.
Mm-hmm.
And our like kind
So
of
you assume.
Yeah, I like to assume that he hasn't done something that I've asked.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. Perhaps I might be like kind of a touch controlling. I don't know. Probably doesn't come through at all.
I actually don't experience it personally. I've never experienced that. But I do know that you tend to experience anxiety, and it's a controlling emotion.
Yeah. So I might make the assumption that Charles has forgotten about something. Like in my heart, I'm like, I know he forgot to pick up the dry cleaning. And instead of just like waiting to see if he got in when he gets home, I really don't like the uncertainty of that. So I like to just jump in with he definitely didn't do it. And when he comes home, I'm gonna be like, did you get the dry cleaning? And
you have the whole conversation coordinated.
Yes, I have it all coordinated in my head. And so when he walks through the door, he's gonna get that worst version of me.
Mm-hmm.
That's like, oh, okay. And it's definitely it's increasing my negative emotions, which is going to increase the reactivity in my voice.
Yeah.
When he says no. And so sometimes we're wrong, and he comes in with the dry cleaning in hand, and then I feel like a real asshole.
But do you tell him?
Yes.
Good for you.
Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. I'll own it. Sometimes.
Good for you.
Other times, I just sheepishly hide because I know that there's a ton of stuff he's definitely asked me to do and I haven't done.
Every time I do it, I laugh. To be fair, I've learned to really pull myself back as much, and I'm human, so of course I'm going to make the mistake like our last episode. But I do actually laugh where it's happened multiple times where I'm like, because Adriel, I always ask him to clean after himself when he cooks. And he's a phenomenal cook. Love it when he cooks. I love every time this man makes a meal. I hate the way the kitchen looks every time this man walks into it because it's ridiculous. And every time he's like, I'm cooking, and I'm like, okay, like, this man's gonna leave the kitchen a mess. He's going to like walk away and forget to do half the things that he wanted to do, because also he has ADHD, so it literally is going from one task to another, forgetting the one that he had planned. And then I walk in with like this whole conversation in my mind where I'm like, I'm gonna be like, so, the kitchen, looking great, spotless, it's amazing. And then I walk in and it actually is spotless, and I'm like, oh baby, oh, if you knew the conversations I had planned in my mind for this exact moment. But I think to call myself out, because it helps me learn not to do it again.
Yes. And I think it's so interesting of like allowing yourself to learn something new, right? You're giving yourself new information, you're taking it in, and I think it's really helpful to start to balance out those thoughts later, because you're like, you know what, actually last time he cooked, he actually cleaned the whole thing, and you can start to use that information to your advantage. Now, the tricky part is when your assumptions are correct.
Ooh, it feels so good though.
It does. There's like this special category of, I would say, Schadenfreude, of like, where you're like really kind of getting that happiness with the misfortune of others, and you're like, yeah.
That's literally the feeling.
So good, but it's not usually that helpful.
Not at all, but you want to do the wiggle dance with it.
know, yeah, I want to feel really good about it.
And then afterwards you feel like shit.
Yeah, but no one ends up feeling great. And I think that one of the assumptions, my sister and I have this like running joke. I don't know why I always mute myself on the phone. I don't understand how I do it. And she actually did this one to me, where she'll like assume if I'm being quiet for too long, she'll be like, Lauren, did you mute yourself? And she says it with this like, just like kind of
annoying
dejection and annoyance, where I know that she's in her head calling me a boomer. And then one day, one day I do that, another day maybe she has bad service, and it feels so good. But when she correctly assumes that I have muted myself for the 100th time, I know she feels a lot of joy.
Yeah. And then how do you feel?
I feel embarrassed. I feel a lot of shame, because I know I'm being judged. And like, shame is helpful if it keeps you in a community. And I know my sister's really not ever going to get rid of me, so I don't really need to feel shame, unless she is, in which she should mention that.
She would never.
I know. I stuck around for a bit.
Yeah.
But there are times, so I think when your assumption is accurate, yeah, you feel that like kind of like cha-ching, like I was right.
Yeah.
And it usually doesn't land with anyone ever feeling good.
No, it doesn't. And the thing that I always like, in the beginning, Adriel and I used to actually have this conversation, because there were so many times that in different cases people did make him feel ashamed for things that had connected to his ADHD.
Yeah.
Like forgetting to clean up after himself. And so it was a lot of like, again, in the beginning of the relationship, you're talking about all the things and you're communicating about all of it and how people have reacted. And one thing that I really, and I teach this to the clients all the time too, but I'm like, listen, when you judge someone and assume someone's gonna fail at something that they really don't even feel like they don't like it. Like they don't, like, it's not like you're really, first of all, you don't purposely choose to put yourself on mute.
Yeah.
Secondly, it's not something that you can be like, I'm proud of it. Like, I accidentally mute myself all the time. It's the most amazing feeling, especially when I'm on like a call with a client and then suddenly I'm muted.
Oh, it's happened.
So like, instead of actually like igniting more shame on a behavior that's not done purposely. Like, shame is a behavior where it's a learned behavior, right? You have to learn to feel ashamed, to learn to do something different. But if I'm not doing it on purpose, it's really not so much in my control.
Yeah.
And if like every time I walk in and I'm like, ha, you didn't clean the kitchen, and in like this annoyed way, like something's wrong with you, and I was right that something is wrong with you and you
Yeah.
failed, it's the worst feeling.
It is.
It's the worst feeling. Like, why would someone want me to fail?
Of course, especially someone who loves me, right?
Yes.
And it feels terrible, and it also isn't like there's that moment where it feels like you're like, yeah, it was right, but then there is this like, I don't want to be right, and I don't want to be thinking like that about people,
and I don't want to think that my sister's doing this and make her feel bad. Like, none of us ever feel that way. So that short-term ego that wins,
Yes.
that we all have, it does the wiggle, quickly comes with the, I'm not really a good person by feeling good about this.
Yeah, of course. It doesn't end up feeling good in the long term.
No.
It goes into that short term, long term, making that assumption, correctly assuming that someone is going to do something wrong and they did it. Oh, wow.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't end up feeling good.
No, and that's the thing where a lot of times learning to do differently, because it really is an intentional act, right? And with all judgments, with judgments, it's the intentional act of purposely changing the judgment, like learning to notice it, learning to notice when we make assumptions, and that's like an example. I use myself last week. I did call out that it was an assumption. Right. And then afterwards, when Adria was just like, I wasn't doing it on purpose, I was like, I did say it was an assumption. He's like, yes, you called it out. Good for you for noticing it. But as you were saying it, you really believed it. like, you ended up saying, I believe my assumption, which then I was just like, you know what? He's not wrong.
Yeah.
So my second intentional act to do things differently is learning to acknowledge it's an assumption, and I don't know if it's true or not. It's an assumption. And we're going to give that space between me and the assumption instead of saying it's an assumption and it's true. It's an assumption, and then learning to slowly change the words and describing things.
Yeah. And I think that's the key in being non-judgmental, being able to describe the situation with just the facts.
Yeah.
The facts are that he asked me to walk the dog in the morning. And it ended up working out great because I actually felt good after.
Yeah.
And I had been saying, I haven't been working out, I haven't been feeling great. So it's interesting because as we change and we just kind of give the facts, it really changes the intensity. And so sometimes I think of assumptions as mini conspiracy theories.
Yeah, they are.
A lot of the time. And instead of going into my mini conspiracy theory, being able to just say, this is what happened.
Yeah.
And if my sister, instead of saying did you mute yourself, said, hey, I didn't hear you for a sec. Is everything okay? It's a lot different, right? I'm going to hear that so differently.
Yeah.
And so being able to start to get really clear about what it is that we're observing. And that usually also so much the intensity.
Yeah.
And it may be that I just am observing anxiety. With the dry cleaning, I was observing anxiety because, okay, so I had an incident a while back. Again, I swear this GI stuff follows me everywhere. I have a very soft stomach. I did have food poisoning on a plane and throw up all over my winter coat.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It was a dark day.
That was horrible.
It was horrible. And so the dry cleaning was my winter coat, right? So I'm thinking about that's why I cared.
Yeah.
And instead of being I feel really anxious because I'm worried I won't have my winter coat and it's cold.
Yeah.
I'm saying something else. I'm communicating something different, which is I'm assuming that you forget about something that's important.
Yeah.
And so we want to be clear about what it is that's happening and why do we care about it, right? Typically it wouldn't make a difference, but it does make a difference if you're traveling and you need that thing.
Yeah. I think the other thing with non-judgmental stance, and this is where I say it helps because I practice it in therapy and in my session. I really try to practice it outside of therapy and in my session. And it's ask questions. So actually, Ted Lasso, have you seen Ted Lasso?
Yes, I have.
Be curious. Be curious, not judgmental. the be curious part is actually the key in learning how to practice non-judgmental stance. It's asking questions.
Yes.
It's asking yourself questions. What emotion am I feeling? What am I noticing I'm feeling? What is my thought around this? What is my worry around this?
Mm-hmm.
What is my dislike around this? Like, what is it that person did that I don't like, that makes me feel uncomfortable? Why does it make me feel uncomfortable? What do I want to do about it?
Mm-hmm.
So even when I'm sitting in a room with someone that's very, very negative and having negative beliefs, I'm able to non-judgmentally say, it's, you know what, it's pulling me down. It's making me constantly have like to fight myself to having negative beliefs. I'm noticing myself having to like fight my own cognitive distortions and negative beliefs when I'm sitting with this person. When I walk away, it kind of feels like something's gotten pulled down rather than pulled up. So what do I want to do about it? Unfortunately, it would be, I would prefer not to see this person as often. And yeah, that does hurt me. It's like not going into the place of judging that person.
Right.
But going into the place of explaining, it's hurtful to, I feel hurt by having to do this to another human being. And again, I sleep with myself at the end of the night, and I'm the first and foremost, most important person in this life. My happiness matters. So I gotta learn to let go. So practicing non-judgmental stance is asking questions within yourself of what's going on and why you don't like it. It's a very objective perspective.
And I think that's really the key takeaway of like applying that, trying to understand what's happening within myself and why am I having this thought? Where is it coming from? And once we're able to clarify that, we're able to have a different conversation. And so I think that's really where I want our viewers to be thinking about is how can I approach a situation where I would typically make an assumption non-judgmentally? Where's the judgment here? Where is it coming from? And why would it show up at all?
What's it gonna do for me?
So that's about as much time as we have today.
So if you have any questions, comments, do as Adriel did. Feel free to leave us a comment on our posts. We are currently on Spotify,
Apple Podcasts,
and YouTube. Thank you and happy Thursday.